active recall, past papers, organisation are key and incredibly important in the lead up to your exams. Shark, do, 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 baby shark. Guys, I actually have a conspiracy about that song because every single child that I have met, yay far, has been obsessed with that song. Anyways, let's get to the actual subject of this video. So, it is May the 6th and we're weeks away from our exams, and in some cases, just a few days. How do you save your grade in such a small time interval? Don't worry, I've got you. I've got like all these stories that you hear about on the web, how I went from a D to an A star within 2 weeks. They're not clickbait. These people have just found the revision techniques that work best for them. So in this video, I'm going to share with you 3 of, I think, the most important things I think you guys should be aware of. My first tip is about organisation. You can't work to your best ability unless the study area that you're studying in, the resources that you're going to study from are organised. Investing time into organising your study space and your study resources will inevitably result in a better study outcome for you. So in terms of organisation, I think there are 2 types. There's the physical organisation, but there's also the mental organisation. Are you aware of the fine details of the exams you're about to sit? Do you know your exam board? Have you looked at the specification? Because that's another thing that is so important. Do you know the splits of the times for different sections within your exams? Do you know how it's going to be marked? If you don't stress yourself too much. It's actually more simple than people tend to. In terms of the specification, every single exam board on their website will have the specification for the course that you're going to sit. And if you just scroll through that, the specification just gives you key details on information that you have to know. This is pivotal because this is kind of the limit within which they can ask you exam questions. So if it's not on your specification, they can't test you on it. Obviously, they can ask you applications of your knowledge, but they can't explicitly ask you to recall a fact that they didn't put on the specification. So it's always important to have a glance of that. And if you're running short of time, maybe just have a look at it before you sleep. Maybe have a look at it when you're walking to school, on the bus to school. It's a good way of revision. It's a good method of revision, but also kind of highlighting key things that you need to be aware of. Now, the second type of organisation is obviously physical organisation. So are your notes organised? Do you know where your past papers are? Do you know where your textbooks are? Your notes, are they written in a nice concise structure that's easy to read and access information from? But this is my A2 chemistry folder. It's much better compared to my AS folders because I learned from my mistakes. As soon as you open it, if I can open it, I've got a piece of information that I need to know for my exams. So that means that every time that I'm opening my chemistry folder to grab something, that gives me an opportunity to just glance at this piece of information, and that's a source of revision in itself. Now, in terms of the actual content of the folder, in the first section I have periodic table, which is key if you're doing A-level chemistry. I've got my data book, I've got my key specification at glance. So this is what I was talking about, but this is a more concise version. And then I have my specification. So this section is on electrochemistry. So I have actually taken my time throughout year 12 and year 13 to scour the internet, scour different resources. I've put a concise, more matter-of-fact version on my actual notes that go in my folder. So it means I don't have a lot of notes to look through when I'm stressed and I've got 2 days to my exam. So the way that you structure your notes actually determines how easy it is for you to revise from them. So always bear that in mind when you're actually creating your notes. Also in my folder I have past paper questions. I'll speak about that in a few seconds, but I have past paper questions. These ones aren't completed, and I'll speak about how I use past papers. So yeah, that just goes to show that Organising your work isn't a waste of time. Although it may seem like a chore at first, it is incredibly important to organise the workspace you're going to work in, because an organised workspace means an organised mind. There's a reason why people tend to focus a lot more in the library, because not only are you surrounded by people who are working, but it's also a clear space, it's a clear learning space. My second point, past paper questions are so important. I can't reiterate how important past paper questions are. I owe my success of GCSE Sciences and AS Psychology. The reason why I got the top grade is because of past paper questions. Not only is it a source of repetition, but it's also an exposure to keywords that the examiners are looking for. On the side of mark schemes, you see what examiners put as accept or ignore. What the examiners put as ignore, especially for sciences, tends to be scientifically incorrect information. And if you can identify them early on in the exam, when you see a similar question, you're going to know not to write that answer because you'll lose marks for it. Also, there's something called the examiner's report. It shows the response of the examining board, so AQA and Edexcel, to how students coped with that question. So say one year you're doing your GCSE science and there's a question on fractional distillation, and that year everyone did well. Everyone did well. In the examiner's report, it will say we were surprised to see that 94% of students actually achieved 4 marks and 98% of students achieved 2 marks or above. That is a warning sign that the examining board are going to try and avoid that topic in further years, because students are confident with it, and it's not going to differentiate between your top students, your middle tier students, and your lower tier students if everyone's doing well. Compared to a question on titrations, where surprisingly only 12% of students managed to get 2 marks and above on the question, the examiner's report will say 12% of students managed to achieve 2 or above marks in it. Students struggled more with the application side of the question. You know already by reading that there's a pretty good chance it's going to appear in the following year's paper or the year after's paper, because they know it's a challenging question, and with challenging questions you get your normal distribution curve where you're easily separating out your better students from the middle students, as I was saying before. So the examiner's report can specify that students specifically struggled with the converting element of titration questions. So after reading that, and you're doing the real exam itself, you're going to look out for these things. So you're kind of learning through the mistakes of others, and the examiner report is an excellent way of learning what the mistakes of other students are. Now, let's get on to the big one, past papers. This is the paper. See, this is your paper, right? These are the questions you're sitting. Why wouldn't you practice the questions released by the people who are going to write your questions? Why wouldn't you give yourself that advantage? They allow you to apply the knowledge. They also allow you to identify your weaknesses. It also allows you to perfect your exam timing. It also allows you to perfect your exam technique. There are certain keywords in questions in the stem of the actual question themselves that dictate how the question should be answered, and you should be aware of that. The reason why I'm so confident and I'm so aware of these types of questions and these keywords is because I literally eat, sleep, drink, wake up, shower, exam questions. And my top tip for you guys, especially because we're so tight for time, is literally grab yourself a folder, grab yourself a printer. I've used the printer at my school to print an exam pro, to print off questions on every single topic. There's a set of questions and I literally answer the question. Before doing this, you don't want to make waste of the questions, so try and do a little bit of revision so that you're not answering the questions blindly, especially if you're short for time, using your exam questions as a source of revision. So as I'm going along the questions, I look at the topics, I look at the units, and I'm literally making my revision notes on the questions. So not only am I answering exam questions, but I'm also refreshing my knowledge. Sometimes I'll do this without looking at my textbook, so it's kind of like a source of active recall. I try to write as much as I can remember. Did some notes on the kidneys at the bottom there, a few diagrams, a few annotations, and it means that you get more out of doing past paper questions. Next thing with past paper questions is use your mark scheme effectively. When you're using your mark scheme, don't literally copy it down, because that's a source of passive learning, but read it, go back to your question, identify where you went wrong and why you went wrong, and if after reading the mark scheme you still don't understand the concepts behind the question, go to your teacher, go to your friend, your peers, and ask them to explain it. If you guys want a detailed video on how I use mark schemes to maximize my grades, just write it in the comment section below. After I've gone through the questions, answered them, checked the mark schemes, checked the examiner's report, I'm confident with the most part of questions and I understand the concepts of the questions, flashcards or any form of active recall that you're comfortable with. What I tend to do is I tend to make these small flashcards, so I just cut the big ones, so your standard size ones, into half or into quarters, because they're more convenient, more practical, and you save paper, and you literally write the exam question on the front of the flashcard, and on the back you write literally the mark scheme answer. Now, my last thing when it comes to past papers, how do you use your past paper questions? There are two types of ways of using them. Number one is sitting the whole paper and sitting it in the time restraints that you'd normally sit them. Benefits of this is that this gives you exposure to a range of different topics. It also gives you a good indication of the progress and the grade that you're currently at, because once you mark the paper you can compare it to the grade boundaries of that year. But the negative thing about this is that these are very time consuming papers. They take quite long, especially A-level ones. Often in exam papers there are going to be topics that you're weaker at and topics that you're stronger at, and I definitely recommend in this period focusing just on things you're weak at. So that is a major disadvantage. It doesn't allow you to style your time towards things that you're weaker at, because you have to do the whole paper, right? The next style of using your exam questions is by doing topic focused questions, as I was showing you before. So in biology I struggle quite a bit with inheritance questions, so I've printed out this booklet of inheritance questions, and after doing that, as I said before, I'm going to use my mark schemes, the examiner's reports, to identify the parts of this topic that I'm weaker at and try to iron them out before the exam. So my final tip for you guys about last minute revision is active recall. Actively recalling information is the best way of reinforcing the information, as it reinforces and creates new neural pathways in your brain. And by active recall I mean literally putting yourself in a situation where you're forced to recall the information independently from your notes. Reading your notes, watching a video, then 20 minutes later doing exam questions where you're forced to remember that information, or 20 minutes later getting a piece of paper and doing what I like to call a blurt, where you literally get a piece of paper and a pen, you write down everything you can remember, because at the end of the day in the exam it's literally just going to be you, your brain, the information that you can remember and how you interpret it onto the exam paper. Active learning is the opposite to passive learning. When you're answering flashcards, another source of active recall, say the question is, why are some hydrogen oxygen fuel cells called alkaline? I'm going to have to pause and I'm going to have to think about the answer. I actually don't know it off the top of my head, but the fact that I have to actively go into my long-term memory to recall the information means I'm going to reinforce those neural pathways, as I said before, and it's going to strengthen those neural signals, and it means I'm more likely to remember it in the exam. Common examples of passive learning include, as I said before, reading your textbook, highlighting notes, especially if they're not your own notes. So we've reached the end of my video. Hopefully it hasn't been too long, and hopefully you guys aren't too stressed. If you are, check out my video on how I cope with stress, because stress will only be your greatest enemy. Keep working hard. Last few weeks now, imagine in 6 weeks time I'll be completely ridden of A-levels, like bifolders, like see ya. Keep going, you've got this. Make yourself proud, and remember to look after yourself. Bye bye guys, and see you guys in the next video.